Okay, so this begins a little mini series of videos I'm going to do about Dodge pickups from the 70s and what the differences are. I decided to do this video simply because suddenly I had a whole variety of them on the yard within the last month. And some are still here: 72, 73, 74, 76, 77, 78, and an 80. That covers quite a bit of the variety. In addition to the variety that I currently have, I've got all kinds of stuff, parts over the years I've gathered up. Some I still have, some I've sold. So I think I've developed a fairly good knowledge base, and I want to pass that on. This is going to be the same intro for all the videos. So if you're watching this and it's not the first one, then go back and check out my channel or the playlist that I hopefully will set up, and then you can watch all of them. I'm going to try to keep them in that 10 to 15 minute range, so I really don't know how many I'm going to have. I might have 2, I might have 15. Well, I won't have 15. I might have like 4, something like that. It kind of depends. So, but I'm going to do it in a logical manner as best I can. So the logical progression and the way these videos are going to work, the way I'm going to put them up, is how you would encounter a vehicle, whether it's online or whether you see one sitting on the side of the road for sale. Exterior first, what are the differences? Then you would probably get inside, check out the cab, then that's going to be the next thing, the interior. Then underneath the hood, the various differences under the hood. And then the last part would be mechanical and miscellaneous oddball things. Not so much mechanical, because most of the mechanical changes are going to be purely option driven, and I'm not going to get deep into options and packages and stuff like that. I'll mention some of the things, but I'm not going to get into this year had this option, this one had this, because that changed way too much. And with pickups, it was, and actually anything in the 70s really, the whole deal was if you could pay for it, the factory would make it for you. And I have seen some really weird stuff that was not, quote, available, but yet somehow was available. So I'm not, like I say, I'm just not going to get into that part of it. So here's something that I think really needs to be mentioned the way I'm doing this video. You're not going to see pristine vehicles. You're not going to see the show trucks. I'm dealing with just old, sometimes quite beat up trucks, original stuff that I don't believe has been changed or modified. In some cases, maybe never even worked on a day in its life in the last 40, almost 50 years on some of these things. The reason for that is simple. I want to know the way it was when it left the factory, and that's what I'm trying to show to you, is the way it left. Now, a nice show truck, it could be 100% perfect as factory, but I don't know that because so many of these parts are so similar, you won't notice. And I'll show you, especially when I start talking about the pickup boxes. There are a lot of differences in the boxes over the years, way more than I ever realized until, again, like I say, I started looking at them and realizing that, oh, this is different, that's different, and then really started looking at all the differences that there are. So you can see a bunch of beat up rusty things. You can see stuff like this: busted windshield, rust on it, whatever, trashy or rat infested interiors. But so long as the pieces are original, that's what I'm going for. That's what you're going to see. So please keep that in mind. Don't diss the trucks. They are what they are. Okay, part 3 is not going to cover as much as I thought. I kind of didn't realize I had 15 minutes all by itself just on radiator supports. So that's all part 3 is just radiator supports. I was going to put the cab stuff in. That'll be part number 4. It might seem kind of boring, but there's a lot of differences in radiator supports. There's actually a lot to talk about there. And I think that's about it for now. Enjoy. Okay, let's talk about radiator supports. I have a few I'll be showing you. So, we have 1972. This is obviously the first year, so this is kind of the baseline what we'll measure off of. From 72 through 6 are pretty much the same with very few changes and differences. The one thing that I will mention is where the mounting points are to the frame. They've changed a little bit over the years. There's 3 different places where they'll mount, and one of them is kind of unusual because I've only seen it like once or twice, but there's evidence of it. So 72, like I say, pretty basic, pretty simple. We move over here to 74. I do not have a 73, at least not one that's accessible. I have one in a vehicle, and I'm not going to take it out to show it to you. Again, it's basically identical. This particular one had the narrow radiator in it, so this part is wider, and I will show you this. You can see that's quite a bit narrower there. Just because it had a narrower radiator in, that piece has to be wider, and it's always the passenger side width that's different. And again, otherwise it's identical, with the exception of, you know, they started adding a few more things. Like here they've got a little indent because they started to mount the jack and everything underneath the hood. Prior to that, they were all primarily inside the cab underneath the seat. They're starting to change that, so they made a provision here. You can actually see part of the old jack holder when we flip these over. It was up here versus down here later on, but they were getting ready to make those changes. You know, a couple little dimples here and there may be different between them, but essentially the same. I'm over to 75. Again, no significant difference, with the exception of, and you can kind of see there's a little bit of a bump out here now on the bottom, right in the center. And 76, I'll show you one thing that's different about it. And you can see it's not on that one or the previous one. So that's really about the only difference that I've ever noticed between these two. Otherwise, they're all the same. And then we come over here to 76. Again, basically no difference between the previous years other than the already mentioned changes. But here, this little bump out on the bottom has 2 holes. This is one of the other possible mounting spots. I don't know why they did it so narrow right in the middle, but I've seen one, I can't remember if it's my Ram Charger or another one I've seen, where it was actually, there's 2 of them right next to each other, right in the middle, and that was the provision for it. You know, to me, it seems kind of dumb that you would mount so close to the middle on a radiator support, knowing that radiator supports have a tendency to get a little beat up every now and then, just by virtue of collisions and whatnot. So, but again, otherwise, no real significant differences. Now we get into, it says 78, but this may have been that 77. If not, it was a really early 78, and this is more indicative of a 77. This is where some of the changes start to happen. So, because of where the turn signal and parking lights are, the wires come through up here in this hole instead of the big one down here, which they have a divot for. So that's like the big change. And then they have, now we've got a slightly inboard set, oops, my shadow is in the way, inboard set of mounts. This is the wider set on the previous years, and now we've moved in just a little bit. This one, I'll show you when I flip it over. You know, it's kind of in that pocket, that support pocket. This is, you know, inside the radiator opening, I guess we'll call it that. And again, that's really about the only difference that I've ever seen. Then we get to 78, and now this is, with this version of 78, this will work with everything prior, because we've got the hole up here for the 77, 78 lights. You've got a hole down here for the 72 through 6 lights, and that hole is noticeably larger than the previous ones. You've got the mount, the really wide mounts, the slightly inboard, but it does not have that little provision right here in the middle for those two center mounts. So those mounts must not have, I mean, they must have figured out that it probably wasn't the best idea, and they decided to go away from it. The other thing that's changed, oddly enough, just for this one, is there's a divot right here that's no longer there, which you can see right there on that one. Why they took that out just for 1 year, because it shows up again back in '79, I don't know. But that's those couple differences. This probably has one of the, this is the biggest set of changes so far to date. And then we move into '79, and of course that is when there's a whole bunch of differences. So obviously this is a '79 that was set up for the quad headlight setup. So obviously that whole area is different. And the headlight mounting bracket just bolts in there. If it's the quad headlight, you have this big hole down here for the turn signal park lights, same size as the previous. The other noticeable difference, and it's a change in the hood, is the hood latch arrangement. Because now this, you kind of see this one, just the difference. I've always called the 79, 80 and up the Omni latch, because it's basically the same as like an Omni, minus the, you know, the actual, if it's got that on it. But it looks a lot like an Omni latch. I think I've actually put an Omni latch on my 84 once because I needed one, and that's what I had that fit. But otherwise, everything else from this side is basically the same as all the previous, minus the couple things I've already talked about. So now we're going to go over here and take a look at an 80, which the 79 and 80 are essentially the same, except this one is just for the two headlight system. And it's hard to tell because they kind of undercoated the crap out of this. But this whole bucket assembly is spot welded on. There, you know, there's 4 spot welds. If you want to change one of these from a 2 headlight to a 4, just drill those spot welds out. This bucket pops out, and then you can see you have already the rest of the stamping set up, ready to go for the 4 headlight system. You just get your bracket, your wire adapter, boom, you're done. All right, let me go flip them over and we'll show you the backside. Okay, so we've got them flipped over here. This is our 72. And it's most likely it's going to look just like every other one you've ever seen. There's one significant difference. I believe this is a 72, 73 thing, which is very common. 72, 73 seems to be, everything was the same until they changed it. But these guys right here, where the wires get held into place, you know, there are these spot welded on little tabs with the little rubber coating stuff on them. You fold them over, hold the wires down. And like I said, I don't have a 73, so we'll jump over here to 74. And now we have these that are clipped in. There's a hole there, and you can pop them out from the other side. And that way, I think it's obviously is a lot easier from the factory to do them, because you just drill a hole and then you pop those in later. And otherwise, nothing is really different other than that. And of course, like I said, you know, there's this little divot that I mentioned, and now we have these 2 extra holes here in a different spot from the other previous year to help hold the jack. So, you know, this is a jack holder that or it's an emissions thing. I don't know, it's so beat up. Either way, this is provision for the jack. Now we move over to our 75, and this is also one setup with a narrow radiator, because you can see, you know, this is a lot wider, and you can easily make one to go from a narrow radiator to a wide. You just measure it out, you cut it, then you'll have to probably just nut and bolt the spots where the radiator gets held on, or if you have a ton of time and you want to put those little cage nuts, not even cage nuts, whatever they are, in there, you can do that too. But otherwise, everything else is pretty much the same. Now this is where the jack is going now from this point forward. Here's our 76. Again, identical to the previous year. I've yet to really notice anything that's different. Oh, I should mention, I'll go back over here to 75 where you can see them a little better. See, here's our, what I call the outboard mounts for the radiator support. They're in this little pocket here. Sometimes this is a stud that comes out, sometimes it's a bolt that goes in, sometimes it's a bolt that goes all the way through. I have yet to figure out the rhyme and reason between those three attaching ways. See, and then we get over into this one. Oh, that one's dirty, let's show you this one. So now here, oops, yeah, this is where I'm at anyway. That was a 76, here's our 77, and now they're a little bit inboard, and now there's more of a reinforcement here that there really was not on the previous years, just for the mounting sake. So it's in, you know, it's 6 inches in of where it used to be. You know, this is the pocket where it used to be. This little extra support now is gone. They've moved it over to here. That's the only difference that I've ever been able to notice. And of course this one has these weird not having the holes here, whereas the next one does. And again, identical to the previous one, minus the other added holes. No other differences that I can see. And sometimes, like, mounting holes for this kind of stuff, the radiator, the coolers, those changed a little bit over the years from one to the next. Don't get too wound up about that. It's just, those are just running changes, or they were somewhat based on model or assembly plant perhaps too. So here we go into our 79. Again, other than the obvious changes where the headlights are, no real difference that's noticeable or seeable in any way, shape, manner, or form. Everything is essentially the same as the previous version. Let me go back. I forgot to mention something back here. So we talked about, oh, here we go, these holes for this really inboard mounting that are not on this 75, but they kind of are. So they're already punched in the inner lower part, but not the outer lower part. So it's like they knew they were going to do something, but they weren't sure if they were, or maybe they were going to, depending on the model. Very confusing, very confusing. So, and then all the rest of them, same way too, have these inner ones, but they don't have that little bump out, but they're not drilled out on the other side. So I suppose it was one of those things where once it was in, it was part of the stamping process, they just left it. It was easier. Once it was done, it was done. So now we move over to this 80 for what we can see. It's exactly the same as that other 79, minus the headlight area. So, and again, that is all we have for radiator supports.